Good morning. For those joining us online, we'll be starting in a few minutes, so I really appreciate it. Yes, Dean. Three, four, five, six.
Good, Sue.
I'm good. How are you?
Happy to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, we have extras.
Bring that here. You will, okay. All right. Good. How's baby? Not really tolerating. Big deal.
Oh.
That's the news of the day. All right, welcome everybody. We'll call the meeting to order. Mr. Executive Officer, would you like to call the roll, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll defer to our analysts to do the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Officer. Commissioner Jim Anderson,
Present.
Commissioner Roger Anderson,
I'm here.
Commissioner Joe Clark, Commissioner Justin Cummings,
Kim DeSerpa for Justin Cummings, alternate.
Vice Chair Manu Koenig,
Here.
Commissioner Rochelle Lather,
Present.
Commissioner Eduardo Montesino, alternate Commissioner Ed Banks, alternate Commissioner Kimberly DeSerpa, Chair John Hunt,
Here.
and alternate Commissioner Fred Keeley.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Executive Officer, do you have a message for us?
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick updates. One is just a reminder that we're conducting this meeting during a hybrid model that allows members of the public to join us either virtually or in person. For any members of the public that would like to provide comments on any item on today's agenda, they'll have up to 3 minutes. Staff will inform them when they have 1 minute left and when their time is up. For those joining us virtually, you can press the reactions tab and the raise hand button to indicate that you want to speak on an agenda item. For those joining us via conference calls, pressing *9 will raise your hand. And for members of the public joining us in person, if you can state your name at the podium and you can provide comments then. So that is the hybrid meeting process. The other update I wanted to provide is that we have some new faces on the commission. We have Joe Clark, who is now representing Capitola as the regular member. He's not here today, so we have our alternate. And also we have Supervisor Kimberly DeSerpa, who is going to be our alternate county representative. And she will be a voting member because Supervisor Cummings is not here. So those are the two updates, Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Serrano? Okay, the next item is the minutes. Does anyone have any questions or amendments to the minutes?
I move approval. I'll second that.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Roger Anderson, seconded by Commissioner Jim Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'll abstain.
Okay, thank you. Minutes pass. All right, I'll ask if anyone has any comments for the commission on items that are not on the agenda. Anything online?
No, Chair. No requests.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move to our special presentation on the Scotts Valley Fire Protection District. Life after reorganization. Mr. Serrano, would you like to introduce our speaker?
I would love to. Thank you, Chair. Good morning again, Commissioners. It's been over a year since we recorded the dissolution of Branson 40 Fire and the concurrent annexation into Scotts Valley Fire. Even though it's been a little bit over a year, that was a multi-year process. I still remember like yesterday when I presented LAFCO's findings to the Branson 40 community. And if they had tomatoes, they would have literally thrown it at me. And I get it. It was human nature to be defensive for some obscure agency telling them that their fire agency was failing. But we were able to get past that. We were able to build trust with that community, and we were able to successfully reorganize the fire district to ensure adequate level of service to the community. So even though it was a multi-year process, we have looked at major projects like this reorganization. It's a new series that we've been calling LAFCO Original Series. So this is something that we're looking back at. And for the new commissioners, you'll notice that I like to have fun with my presentations. But we're looking at major projects, and especially the ones that were taxing to staff and to the commission. And even though we put all this time and effort and it gets completed, what happens afterwards? Our first episode was the Opal Cliffs Recreation District dissolution that we presented to the commission. The second episode was an update from Central Fire. Remember, we consolidated Aptos, La Selva, and Central. So today's episode is going to be an update on Scotts Valley Fire. And as the chair mentioned, life after the reorganization. Did it live up to what we expected? Are there any lessons learned? And the key thing about these episodes is for us to learn from it and apply it to other projects that we're going to be dealing with in the future, whether it's with fire or the water or sewer, with reorganizations, consolidations. What can we learn from these big projects and apply them so that we are more successful in the near future? So with that, I'm going to introduce our fire chief, Mark Correira from Scotts Valley Fire, and he'll provide us an update. Here you go. Just give me the, yep. There's a button there.
Bottom. On this.
There we go. All righty. Well, good morning, Commission. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Joe, for the invitation. As Joe just stated, my name is Mark Correira. I'm the fire chief with the Scotts Valley Fire District. I just started here about a year and a half, and I'm actually from outside of the area. So I cannot take any credit for any of this. A lot of the heavy lifting was already done before I got here. It was my job just to really implement the work, the hard work that was already completed, as well as see some of the tail end pieces that were actually critical in this entire process. One of the things I'm going to talk about in my presentation is our Branson 40 Advisory Commission. That was one of the pieces that was added. Sitting behind me are two of our Board of Commissioners, Larry Pagler and Marilyn Cooch. They were board members as well in the Branson 40 Fire District. So anything I misstate, I'm going to ask them to correct. And anything that I misstate as well, Joe, please feel free to correct it. So you can go to the next slide. This is just kind of an overview of what I want to talk about. I want to give you guys a highlight of what the existing districts were before they actually came together. Just some of the nuances of the pre-merger conversations, a year in review, like why I'm here, to just talk about what's happened since this reorganization has occurred. And then looking down the line, and then just some of the lessons learned. So we can go to the next one. So Scotts Valley Fire District, 21,000 people before the merger happened, 21 square miles. One of our benefits and challenges is a lot of people know about Scotts Valley, but some people think we're actually part of the city, and we're not. We're an independent fire district, as you all know. We serve all the way from the Santa Cruz city border all the way up Highway 17 up to Glenwood. And we meet at CSA 48 and quite often are actually working with CAL FIRE up there on car accidents and things like that up at towards the summit. We are predominantly a career fire department. We run 3-person engine companies, as well as the majority of our staff are paramedics. Historically, the organization has only hired paramedics, but with the merger conversations, we took on the employees from Branch of 40, and they were not paramedics, but we are still predominantly an ALS fire department. And what that means is there's 2 or 3 different levels of EMTs that are out there, and a paramedic actually goes to school for over a year to actually learn about it, and they actually bring the emergency room to the incident scenes. They're trained in advanced airway skills. They can read an EKG monitor like a cardiologist can. They can administer medications and things like that. So the level of service compared to a standard EMT is much greater. Our paramedic system, we're part of that system, and we're certainly proud to offer that level of service. And as I mentioned before, we have a minimum of 7 on duty. Go to the next slide. The Branch of 40 Fire District was much different. And sometimes these things can make reorganizations and mergers a little bit more challenging. Predominantly, Branch of 40 was a volunteer department. They did have 1 career firefighter on duty every day, and they would augment that staffing with 1 additional either EMT or firefighter, depending on the staffing level for the day. It's a very rural area, and I'll show that on the next slide when we can do some side-by-side comparison. But these differences can really make things challenging. Like agencies merging together, at least in my experience, come together a lot easier than different agencies like a city and a fire district trying to merge. I saw the Central Fire District's presentation. I skimmed through it. I'm sure they were talking about all the grandiose things that happened to make that whole thing come together. And that's wonderful to hear. This had a few more little hiccups and bumps in the road that the groups had to work through. But at the end of the day, there's a really good story to be told here, and I'll capture that at the end. You can go to the next slide. This is just a snapshot of the 2 different communities. As you can tell, the Scotts Valley Fire District was much larger than the Branch of 40 District. We had a lot more voters. And more importantly, if you look at the population per acre, 0.3 was Branch of 40 and we were 1.5. So it just gives you a sense of the differences when you look at a rural community compared to a more of a suburban or a densely core area like Scotts Valley. The majority of our population sits in the city of Scotts Valley. And moreover, our busiest area is in the south end down by Mount Herman Road, which adds a lot of the population where a lot of our calls actually occur. That's why when you look down, the nexus between the population and the incidents that we respond to, you'll see that Branch of 40 went on far fewer incidents. Granted, they're in a remote area that's somewhat challenging to get to. You can't go east-west really easily in Branch of 40. It's either north-west or southeast. So it's made it a little bit more challenging to respond into that area. But I think, frankly, Scotts Valley is the best equipped to do that because we have similar areas outside of our district as well. The Glenwood area, Mission Springs, things like that. So there was a long-standing history, and some of the lessons were learned. There was a shared fire chief at one time before the reorganization actually occurred. In fact, if you rewind the clock, even before Scotts Valley Fire District and the Branch of 40 Fire District was even established, there was, I forget the number or the name of the group, but the fire district that actually served that area included the Branch of 40 area and the Scotts Valley area at one point. So then when the independent fire districts came together, Branch of 40 broke off and had their own, and Scotts Valley had their own. We shared administration. This started about 11 or 12 years ago. Then there was a grand jury report in 2015, from my understanding, is what kind of started this conversation when LAFCO got involved. And as a way to, at least the way I saw it, as a way to help move the process along, or at least allow Branch of 40 to stand on their own, Scotts Valley ended up separating from that agreement because in some weird way, there was a sense of enabling a district to continue to struggle and move along, being part of it. And I think with that separation, that really caused, LAFCO to step in, Branch of 40 board to look at what their options were, and then really start working through the renegotiation process of the reorganization. One of the sentinel moments, and this happened when I was actually here, the B40 parcel assessment, they went to their community. And you guys, please correct me if I'm wrong. They went to the community as a final step towards saying, if you want to keep the Branson 40 Fire District, we're going to need to add staffing. We're going to need to pay people a reasonable wage. To do that, we need to do a parcel fire tax benefit assessment to that. And that ended up failing with 88% of the people voting no. And most people, I believe, at that time felt that when that occurred, that because we heard this from members of our community and their community, that this merger had already happened. That was the moment that the merger happened. And it wasn't until actually 6 or 8 months later in December when LAFCO actually executed the document and made it come together. December 9th and on December 10th is when the Branson 40 Fire Department basically was removed. And then Scotts Valley inherited their assets, their liabilities, and then we moved forward with the plan that was already in place. This is just a snapshot of our district now today. The Branson 40 Fire Station is the one on the bottom. The Herbal Lane, that's our fire headquarters that we've been trying to replace. We've run 2 ballot measures. First one missed by 12 votes. And then the second one, we got 62 or 61.2% of the votes as well. There's a lot of strong support for replacing the station, just not enough to get over the 66.67 threshold. So. And then our other station on Glenwood, the Glenwood Fire Station, that is the one that predominantly responds to the Branson 40 community down Granite Creek. One of the things that also happened with this process was working with our neighboring agencies to actually handle some of the first responses. So the city of Santa Cruz actually handles that south point, south of the Branson 40 Fire Station. If you're looking at it on the map, they can access it up Branson 40 Drive pretty easily. And that took about 20 of the 120 calls off of our responses. So the Scotts Valley Fire District now handles about 100 incidents within that district because Santa Cruz City handles the other ones. So since the reorganization happened, the Branson 40 staff, so the 3 firefighters that were there have all moved up to the Scotts Valley Fire District. They're now part of a 3-person engine company. Nate Lackey, who was the most senior member of that department, he was their interim chief for a little while. He came into our district as an engineer, and the other 2 came in as firefighters. They've completed their 1 year of probation. They're doing great. They're an excellent enhancement to our organization. The annual incident count, as I mentioned before, is about 100 incidents per year. It's not a lot of incidents. So we have the capacity within our system, when you look at our unit reliability, to actually take on those incidents as well. And this is one of those good parts of the story, right? We're able to now take on those incidents. The community is getting a higher level of service because they're getting a 3-person dedicated engine company that's paramedic level trained. It may take us a little bit longer to get there, but they're getting a higher level of service when we get there. And then similarly, we are now getting the taxation, the dollars that were being collected from Branson 40 into the Scotts Valley Fire District. So it allows us to have a little bit more money to provide other levels of service, offset the cost of providing service into the community moving forward. So part of the negotiations process was not to merge the board members in the election process. So one of the enhancements that were made to our district is the addition of the Branson 40 Advisory Commission. It's a 5-person commission. They provide recommendations to our board of directors. They have no voting power or authority. And we've had multiple meetings with them to work through some initial things. One of the biggest issues was Measure T. Measure T was a special tax, parcel tax that was being collected to help offset the costs of capital and things like that within the Branson 40 community. And the Branson 40 Advisory Commission talked to our board and said, look, you don't collect a special tax anywhere else in the district as a whole. Why should you collect it within the area of Branson 40? Our commission heard that, our directors heard that, and they actually repealed Measure T earlier this year. And from what I understand, because I've got a phone call from a few different people, this was a big issue. Measure T was a big issue, keeping it moving forward into this reorganization, only to find about a year later or 6 months later that they recommended repealing it. And the board actually had done it. So again, a good story to be told there. Part of the reorganization also included, as I mentioned, we're inheriting their assets and liabilities, but we added a new fund to our budgeting process called the Branson 40 Service Zone. That was a way to capture the revenue that was coming in. My fear when I saw that was that the Branson 40 Advisory Commission was going to want us to have a budget for the Branson 40 service zone and a separate budget for the Scotts Valley Fire District. Fortunately, they saw the wisdom that all of the services we provide benefit the Branson 40 Fire District, so it should all be one. And the recommendation was to move those funds from the service zone into the general fund, and we run the fire department that way. The other recommendation that came out with the repealing of Measure T was to also remove the service zone. So those tax dollars that are going to be collected in the Branson 40 community will just be going into the general fund of Scotts Valley Fire District. So again, these were big issues going into the merger that have now, less than a year later, have now been swept to the side. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'll talk about this a little bit in the next slide, is that at some point that the advisory commission will go away as well, that this is more of a transitional group that helped with the reorganization process. Now that some of those last minute concerns are handled, then eventually that group will go away. A few other things that we've dealt with Measure S, and we also had Measure W. Measure W was the fire station that we ran in 2023. Branson 40 was not part of that. That measure failed by the 12 votes. We ran it again this last year. And it's unclear. We haven't done the postmortem analysis on the vote as to whether or not the Branson 40 community actually negatively impact that vote. We don't know for sure. We were hoping with the repealing of Measure T that they would see the wisdom in potentially supporting a new fire station, although that was secondary to more equity and fairness within the community. So anyway, we had a board workshop last night looking at what our next steps are going to be with that, and we'll be engaging our community. And then board elections. So as this was moving forward, a non-resident who's very familiar in the governmental world, who is a community activist, you all are familiar with her. She actually has threatened legal action against the district for not going to district-based elections because Branson 40 would not be fairly represented. We are likely at some point going to hire a demographer to come in and do that analysis to see if an underrepresented group under the Voters' Rights Act actually exists within our community. We don't know that for sure. But we might be pausing that for a little bit because we are, and I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, which we can go to. The shared services reorganization, we're going to be participating in a study with Central Fire District in Santa Cruz City, the bottom of the list there. Looking forward, this is one of those things that are coming down, and it may make sense to not do that study right away and wait until we get through this reorganization, because it's possible if we do, as an example, reorganize with like the Central Fire District, what does that mean? They may have to go through that whole study again. I already talked about the Branson 40 Advisory Commission potentially being dissolved at some point. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that. And then budget and funds, I already talked about that. At-large versus district elections, that's that study that we may have to do down the line. The Branson 40 Fire Station, one of the hardest things a fire chief has to do is close a fire station or open a new fire station, or even move a fire station away from a neighborhood. People that are in that neighborhood don't like it, and the people where it's going usually don't like it either because they're afraid of noise. Unfortunately, we had to unstaff that fire station. Some people call it, we closed the fire station. We didn't close the fire station. It's an unstaffed fire station, like a volunteer fire station that you would see in other parts of the country or even in this county. In the Branson 40 Fire Station, we've actually pre-positioned there a few times during high fire danger or during the atmospheric rivers, which allows us, the state, to actually pre-position vehicles there. So we'll add staffing to it during those high risk times. So there is still a need for that station, and it is one of the community assets. It's always going to be, as long as I'm the fire chief, the Branson 40 Fire Station. That is its identity. It still says Branson 40 Fire District on the front of the building. And I think that's important to a community, right? And understanding the importance of these assets that are part of the neighborhood and maintaining their identity as well. We were recently talking, and I know Jim Anderson's here, with Felton Fire about trying to help them through some stuff. And, you know, is there an opportunity to look at regionalization or reorganization down the road where we still provide a higher level of service, but those agencies can still keep their identity? And whether it's through like a volunteer squad or something like that, the Branson 40 volunteer core response, we could actually potentially do that as the Scotts Valley Fire District. So these are some things that we're going to be looking at down the line. We can go to the next slide. So it's just some lessons learned, the speed of the process. I think I've been involved with reorganizations and mergers outside of California. I've been involved with like 13 of them, and of them, a small portion of them have actually come to fruition. And one of the things I've learned through this process, beyond like agencies are easier to merge together, the speed of the process is critical. And sometimes when that speed is drawn out for a really long time, it takes the wind out of people's sails, and sometimes quicker is better. In this situation, the years leading up to when Scotts Valley separated from Branson 40 was somewhat taxing on the staff. They felt that they were helping them and maybe not, and this is internal culture things, not necessarily taxpayers and voters. And those are some of the issues that I'm still dealing with, right? So as the fire chief, explaining to them that no, they are part of our community now and we have to serve them. They're not, there is a benefit to us providing service to that area. The audits and the reconciliation, this was a little bit challenging. It took us about a year. We're still working through these things to get the auditing done and figure it out when they transferred all the assets over. And as an example, the fund balance had $712,000 in it, but that was not all cash. That included fixed assets as well. So we were trying to work through the reconciliation to determine exactly how much cash actually came into the district to solve that. Community outreach and education, this is something that we struggle with. And I think that was, if looking down the line, when and if we ever do this again, being more active in the community outreach process. There was a lot of people that once we went through it, didn't even know what happened, even though it was in the newspaper or we actually advertised it in different ways. Measure T was repealed and we sent postcards to everybody's house, letting them know that the Measure T was repealed. It was a good story to tell. And there were still people within the community that didn't know it was repealed. So just finding new and interesting ways to reach out to our community. We had 3 significant incidents all within a week's period of time in Branson 40. Had a house roof fire. We had another chimney fire that went into a wall. We had a person on a motorcycle hit a deer. So we actually hosted a community meeting. We actually at the Branson 40 fire station to talk about that. We had a really good turnout. We had 20 or 30 people in the room that had an opportunity to ask us questions. So just really trying to look at ways to do better community outreach. I already talked about community identity and the importance of maintaining that community identity in the Branson 40 community. And then lastly, telling our story. That's one of the things I think we don't do enough of. And I'm really working with our board to leverage that of telling our story. And there's a good story to be told here. As I mentioned before, the Branson 40 Fire District now gets a higher level of response. It may take us a little bit longer to get there. As well as the Scotts Valley Fire District now has additional revenue coming in, and we're providing that service arguably for a little bit more cost than we were before. So we have now capacity with the additional revenue coming in to do other things, whether it's, put more cash down towards a fire station, add a new program, add new firefighters, or look at doing other things with those revenues, preventing those lines from crossing down the line from a finance standpoint. So again, there's a good story to be told here. I always, when I talk about regionalization, I talk about it needs to be good for both sides of the line. And this here, it's good for both sides of the line. And I think it's a really good story to tell. So thank you all. I can certainly answer any questions if you have any. And if not, I'll certainly leave you guys to your meeting.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of information. It's well presented. Thank you. I'll open it up to public comments. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Hi, my name is Larry Pegler, and I was the final board chair for the B40 Fire Protection District and have participated in the advisory commission. I just wanted to add a couple of things to underscore what the chief said. He's absolutely correct that the fire station was one of the community identity elements next to the elementary school. Those are probably the 2 things that designate or identify our community as a group. The annual pancake breakfasts were something where you would see neighbors, you would see all of your, the community would turn out for those. And that was probably the biggest loss, if you will, that we feel in not having that. Having the building, being able to use the space inside for community meetings is critical. We have groups that get together, whether it is, for a quilting group or whatever, we'd like to have that as a community space. The chief mentioned the parcel tax. I just wanted to note that I believe the final median cost of that parcel tax was about $2,100. And so it was a significant cost that we would be taking on. That's probably why 89% didn't love it enough to pay that much money. And that was the median. Many were higher. That would have generated, by my last estimate, about $1.3 million. And we hope that would be enough to keep the station open. Yet it would have to rise over time. The 3 things I wanted to flag: the addition of paramedic staff is terrific. I think that is a very big plus to the community. I hear of that from neighbors and residents repeatedly. Response time remains a concern, and that is as much related to the access through the roadways when we have storms or washouts and other conditions, but we're continuing to watch that. To my mind, and the chief could go in deeper, I don't know that we've seen anything really critical in terms of response times. And the final one I would flag, communicating with the community is a challenge. Not everyone reads the paper. There are multiple papers. They don't carry the information, although I will note that Jessica York did a terrific job of covering this issue while she was with us. I think that the changeable message sign, which is letters on a sliding thing out by the fire station, may be one of the most effective things we have right now for residents who are driving by and reading that there's a meeting coming up. There's something happening. It's old school, but it's working. Nextdoor, other social media don't seem to do it. And so the chief and I have talked about a model I have seen, which was the Santa Cruz Municipal Utility Newsletter. It's an occasional mailer, has information about what's going on, contact information. Maybe something like that would work. Postal deliveries still seem to be a way to reach people. So I'd leave it at that. And I'd say that we're all relatively pleased with how things have turned out, and the paramedics are a big plus. Any questions, I'd be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Response or?
No, I just want to thank you all for having me. I do want to share one of my favorite memories of this process since I've been here. Joe and I were having coffee at Pete's Coffee in Scotts Valley, going over it was in February of this year. And this woman came up to him. She had to be in her 70s, 60s, and told him how great his hair looked. And I gotta agree, he has great hair. So I'll just leave you with that. Thank you.
But Chair, I'll just add one more comment. I do appreciate the chief's leadership, but I think the greatest takeaway of this reorganization was that the sky didn't fall. And that was one of the concerns about the community of the unknown. You know, they were so used to their fire district, but their fire district was broken. And we really didn't talk about how bad the situation was. They only had one firefighter on duty. And most of their calls were medical related. And most of their calls were being serviced by an outside agency. They also did not have a fire chief after they discontinued their contract. So LAFCO had to step in. And the speed of the process is very important, but it also has to not be steamrolled. That's why it took 1 year just to build a relationship with the community and build that trust. And then once we were able to conduct outreach and do workshops, then they realized that LAFCO wasn't a threat, that actually LAFCO was looking out for them, that we actually wanted them to get a better level of service. And then the following year was the actual LAFCO process. And that's why when we actually completed the reorganization and we opened it up for protest, the protest period, we didn't get any opposition. Why? Because people were fully aware of what was going on. I know there's always cases where people are like, I had no idea, but we kept reaching out and reaching out. There's only so much we can do, but we didn't get any opposition. And that's because what we did was good government. And what we did is a collaborative approach on solving a problem. And people saw LAFCO as part of the solution. So I really want to give kudos to this commission for completing this reorganization. And it is a great story to tell. But more importantly, it's another model that we can use, because fire reorganizations is not something that's going to be uncommon. On the contrary, it's going to be something that we're going to be dealing with in the near future. The chief mentioned that, kind of hinted on that Central is working with Scotts Valley Fire and the city of Santa Cruz to potentially reorganize. We're looking at that. They invited LAFCO to the table, and that's another key thing. A lot of these local agencies are now seeing LAFCO as a resource, and they're inviting us to be part of the discussions, be part of the, attend these meetings, be at the table, because they see LAFCO as a resource and as a facilitator. So I really appreciate this success story, and I really appreciate the leadership of everyone involved. And I'm hoping to use that as another model for other projects that we work on.
Thank you. Good work. Okay, from the commission, let's go Jim and then Lena. Okay.
Well, I just want to thank Chief Correira. As he said, he came in later in this process and took over from Chief Whittle, but it was apparent that there was no drop in continuity, that he picked up the thing. And Larry, thank you for your contributions through this. It was to say there was no challenges as far as our process, there were a lot of concerns and stuff that everybody had to deal with. And so kudos to you folks for what you did.
Commissioner Koenig.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do have a few questions. The first is actually for Chair Pegler. It's certainly interesting watching the unfolding of this. I mean, I can't think of anything people have ever told me they wanted more than to keep the Brants 40 fire station over, and then to see that overwhelming vote against the cost of doing so kind of really highlighted for me the difference between wants and what we can afford. But I have heard, the occasional grumbling that, well, the study on how much it was going to cost was inaccurate and it was radically overpriced. And if we could have maybe kept it open, if the fire station open, if we had, I don't know, done something differently. I'm just curious what the community sentiment is up there as far as, your ear being to the ground. Is that a prevailing sentiment? Is it, just a few folks, or are people truly generally happy with the current status and level of service?
I'm going to look at Marilyn as well and see which way her head nods, but my general sense is people are happy. People are not dissatisfied. People were very upset to see the scale of that assessment that would have been required to raise the funding to keep a station open. And as I said, the last numbers I looked at, and Manu, I was following this through every iteration. I found 4 different recalculations of that measure as we refined everything. Do we exclude the conference center? Do we have discounts for the school? How do those balance the numbers? About $1.3, $1.27 million needed to be generated. And Chief could tell me, I think what our budget used to be, or maybe Joe knows, I think it was less than $1 million.
Yeah, it was around 600,
That's what I
700,000.
thought. Plus the Measure T. So the scale of makeup that we had to cover to keep a station open and staffed with a chief, and maybe not with paramedics, the kind of coverage that we needed, it was a big gain.
Right.
So
Basically more than doubling the budget.
it seemed that way.
Yeah. Wow.
Close to
And-
it, at least.
And you calculated it 4 times, so you feel pretty confident.
Well, I found 4. There may have been 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And this was done with consultants who had done this work in various areas. So I've got confidence in the study. It was the best we could do given the information that we had to work with.
Interesting. My other question is about the future of the fire station.
Yes.
I mean, as you know, I'm glad to hear it continues to be used as a community center. I mean, and that's sort of the core, thing that people enjoy. I think I've heard suggestions to use it as you've said. It sounds like it is as sort of a volunteer bunkhouse at times, maybe as a staging area for even some more proactive vegetation management activities. Is there any discussion of reinvestment in that facility or expansion of use? Where's that stand?
Yeah, I'll mention the things that I'm hearing the most of are having a community space to meet in other than the school, right? And so having the conference room, or whatever we call it, with secured access is critical. We'd like that. There are other issues that the chief may speak to.
Yeah, so we're in the process, a couple of things. Before this whole thing, the Barnes family gave a significant donation to the Brants 40 Fire District. And we wanted to make sure that, and those dollars were reconciled before the merger happened, so we knew how much money was set aside. They bought a Type 6 fire apparatus, which is a pickup truck that's used in wildland firefighting, because it was something that we needed. That was something that Scotts Valley didn't have, and that's something now that we can staff to respond into that area. The community room itself, to Larry's point, is very important to the community. It gives them an alternative meeting spot, as well as they were in the process of building a brand new building behind the Brants 40 fire station that housed 2 apparatus bays and living quarters above it. So there is an opportunity to use that as a community asset from a response perspective. I don't think, based on the call volume, when we look at, in call density and those types of things, that it'll ever be staffed as a permanent full-time fire station with 3 firefighters in it. But down the line, we could certainly look at, and I was just having this conversation yesterday with one of my staff members about looking at maybe if we have the ability, if we have additional staff, to put them there, or have a volunteer staff to be resourced there on certain days or nights of the week that can help with first response, as well as back up the Scotts Valley Fire District. Our long-term goal is, and if you guys can help us with this, we'd appreciate it. We applied for grants. I'm sorry, we put in for permitting to do a remodel on the station in June. We finally got comments back in December, 27 comments. And we're in the process of responding to those. So the process of building in this county, as you may know, takes a little bit of time. But our long-term goal is to actually remodel that station. We've already put electronic door code system in there so we can control it through the internet. We'll also set up the thermostat in there to control it through the internet. And then if somebody needs to use the room or wants to use the room, we can do that remotely from our headquarters station. But our long-term goal is to make that a secluded area, have a restroom there, and use the Barnes family donation to do that. And my recommendation to my board is going to be to dedicate that room to the Barnes family so that the Barnes family will have some sort of a legacy within the fire station itself. So there is some other additional work that needs to be done on the back. There's some curb and guttering and some pavement and things like that. So if there's anything left over, the goal is to secure that up. But I will say that it's not part of the Scotts Valley Fire District. And it's ultimately up to my board of directors to decide what the future of that building holds, right? Whether we keep it, whether we don't keep it or not. So I just share that as, I don't get a vote in that. I just can only advocate on my behalf. So. Yeah.
My name is Marilyn Cooks. I served on the board with Larry. I just wanted to answer your question a little bit more directly as to the feedback from the community. With LAFCO's support and the consultants, I think we did no less than 6 large community outreach meetings, encouraged every way we could to have people come to the board meetings in addition. And the only people I have heard say that they're dissatisfied with the methodology or the numbers are ones that didn't come to any of those.
She's correct. I think that's my perspective as well. I will note that the station continues to be a point where I can find the chief on Monday mornings. It's just sort of an outreach to the community. He's typically there. I can drop in and check in with him. Sandbags, there's a pile of sand and sandbags that are generally available when we need them. So it's that kind of community center. And we'd love to have that room that we can use for various group meetings for the community, but generally happy. And I would underscore the gift from the Barnes family was significant and appreciated. To be able to get the Type 6 engine for our roadways in the district, to have that level of access will be welcome. And I don't know if we can put a plaque on the engine, but the Barnes engine would probably be welcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear there's some investment happening in the fire station, and I'm certainly happy to help however I can with our permitting department. One more question on Measure T. Was there, I guess this means I've been in government too long that I, loathe to give back repeal any tax, maybe, just knowing how difficult they are to get established in the first place. Was there any opportunity to use that for reinvestment in the fire station or other sort of fire prevention activities throughout the district, or were the limitations such that it was really just for operations and therefore that's why it made sense to get back?
Yeah, no, great question. So Measure T, the way it was passed, and I looked at the legislation when it was actually put to the voters, it was a pretty wide brush that it was covered. It was supposed to cover facilities and capital equipment, but also other needs of the district. So there was an opportunity, and I think they did use some of the Measure T funds. It was about $1 million per year that would come in through that. I'm sorry, 100,000. It was a parcel tax. Sorry, I added a zero onto that one. Sorry. Yeah, it was about $100,000 on top of the 800,000 they were collecting in general property tax. So to answer your question directly, yes, there's always something that we could use those funds for, right? But because this was fairly new, and the fact that the residents were paying for it, we could have certainly made an argument as a fire district that while you're a more rural area, or we're providing a higher level of service, technically it costs us more to do that. But that's a pretty slippery slope when we start looking around our district and we look at the Glenwood community or the Mission Springs area, that we have other similar areas in there. So the sensibility behind what was being proposed regarding, hey, well, you don't collect another tax anywhere else in the district. It's unfair to us as a Branson 40 group. And looking at that goodwill is really why I think the board sided with repealing it. Yes, we could have used those dollars for other things. Yes, maybe in 10 years, people may have forgotten about it, that they're paying an extra $60, I believe.
It ranged $100 to $300 on
Okay.
parcel. So
It was significant.
It was
yeah.
a little more than just 60. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, because it was originally one and then you doubled it, I believe is what happened. So, yeah, so yes, we could have used those dollars, but the fact that there was just one portion within our community, the board sided with repealing. We actually had talked about just not collecting it and leaving it open for if we had like something happen to the fire station, we needed to get additional revenue to offset those costs. But the Community Advisory Commission was pretty adamant about no, if you don't repeal it in its entirety, it's going to be really hard for us to support future measures within the Scotts Valley District. So that also played into it as well. Yeah, this is the first time that I've seen in my career, of over 35 years in the fire service, of a tax being repealed and saying we're not going to collect it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it makes sense, sort of cleaning the slate going forward. Almost done here. So speaking of tax measures, of course, Measure Q just passed, and we're all eager to see how we can put that money to work proactively to reduce fire risk in our community. Is there any thinking out of the Branson 40 Commission or Scotts Valley Fire District, more broadly speaking, about how we could reduce risk? And of course, with Branson 40, you took on a large
rural area.
rural area. So
yeah. There's a handful of programs. The fire chiefs have been talking about this. And as you know, the fire chiefs spoke out in opposition of Measure Q because our concern was that not $1 was actually dedicated to the use of wildfire, creating a resilient community, or actually wildfire reduction. We at the Scotts Valley Fire District, I met with a couple of my city council members that are in the community and proposed an idea of, hey, could the city use, because they're getting the direct appropriations from that fund in the tune of about $400,000. Could we take a portion of those dollars? We'll get an agreement between the district and the city, and then the district would apply for matching funds through the county, putting us up higher on that list to do some things with those funds for wildfire resilience and reduction. And they thought it was a great idea. And when I mentioned it to the city manager, she told me that those dollars are already earmarked for parks repair and maintenance, which was, again, the fire chief's concern that this is being branded and marketed as a Resilience and Reduction Act. So I think over time, we're going to learn about what comes from that Measure Q. There's a long laundry list of things that those dollars can be used with. A lot of them aren't, in my opinion, related to clean water or potentially wildfire resilience. We are likely going to apply for grant funds, though, to look at some sort of hazard reduction zone, or we do have a chipper program that we can go out and work with the community with and look for ways to address some of these issues. We've also talked with the city about potentially looking at areas that need projects done and then getting them through CEQA so they're ready to be completed, and then work with CAL FIRE to get those done as well.
I'll just note that many of the residents in our area have convened Firewise groups, and expansion of the chipper program would probably be a simple and welcome use of those funds. We're already in my area gearing up for when the chipper dates will be coming up so we can post and get them to our area. So
great. My final question, and this is sort of more looking forward, right? I mean, you mentioned you have an agreement already with the city of Santa Cruz Fire Department for the southern part of the former B40 district. I'm just curious what that looks like. Is that, they keep track of their call volume and then send you a bill, or is it just sort of mutual aid? And
Yeah, no, great question. So part of the work that was done by the executive director was this idea of, trying to maintain levels of service within that community. And one of the ways of doing that was potentially sending the closest resources. The south and southern part of Branson 40 there's quite a few more calls because it's a little more populated the closer you get to city of Santa Cruz. But city of Santa Cruz is extremely busy, and we didn't want to create a situation where now we're taking them away so frequently. We don't have an agreement with them. It's more just done through our mutual aid agreement, closest unit. And we've been working on some of those things regionally as an agency where we send the closest unit to those critical calls. So it's been a part of a transition. We keep an eye on the calls. I certainly keep an eye on the calls just to make sure that it's not this huge imbalance or creating a undue stress on them. And they just had a study done as well with AB Triton to look at their standards of coverage, which looks at their responses to make sure their stations are in the right spot. So it hasn't been to the point where it's been overburdening them. And we try to work with the community if there are frequent incidents to try to reduce the number of those as well. So no formal agreement, no money being exchanged, just a goodwill. And again, some of that was put in motion by LAFCO when we started this process.
Thank you. Well, it's fantastic, the level of goodwill that exists between the agencies. And of course, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see where this, where it goes as far as the relationship between them going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Right.
Chief.
Roger?
I have just one question. Everybody who owns improved property, actually in California, is worried about insurance and the cost and whether or not they're actually going to be able to get it. And I'm curious what the effect of this consolidation has been, it is likely to be on the insurance market.
No, great. That's a really good question with a moving target answer, I guess, is what I would say. To your point, there's a lot of things that are going on with regards to.
I don't know if there's an answer, but I mean, I like.
Yeah, no, we're monitoring that issue and we're monitoring closely. And that's why, although the fire station's not staffed, having that asset within the community, especially during high fire danger, it's important to us to have that there, right? So that we can put resources there, or when the atmospheric rivers come through, just like they have in the last few days, that we can put units out there, because that area, that community can get landlocked quite easily. One of the things that's going to be coming down, they provided the hazard maps at the state level for the SRA. The local area now is going to be coming down next, and Scotts Valley Fire is going to be responsible for the ones for the city of Scotts Valley. One of the things we're going to do is actually, when those maps are available, we're going to do an open house with our local water district, as well as with the city and as well as the fire department. And we're going to invite Fair Plan representatives to that from the local insurance companies, so that people can come and get those questions answered to find out what is available to them. When we inherited, for lack of a better term, the Branson 40 Fire Station, our first year of going to insure them, our insurance carrier that we've been working with for 20 years said that they can't insure the building for property damage because of its location, but they can get a separate plan that would cost $20,000 a year, and it would be a $25,000 deductible. So the board said, well, it's not a primary station. We're not using it primarily. And my recommendation was to them, let's not insure it. And every year that goes by, we're money ahead. And then we're going to continue to look for those opportunities. And if something happens to the station, then we can always go back to the community to get potential funding or revenue to do that. So yeah, no, that is a moving target. It's a big concern for all of us. We've got places in Scotts Valley where one side of the road can't get insurance and the other side can, and it's the same neighborhood. It feels like, and I came from a flood area where I worked before. This feels very similar to the Biggert's Waters Act that the federal government had to pass to come in and subsidize flood insurance, which was going to expire a handful of years ago, which was going to triple and quadruple people's costs for property damage insurance. And it just feels like it's heading down that same path, of looking for a way to subsidize it so it's more available to the local residents. So I don't really have an answer for him. So
You're thinking about it. That.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we're monitoring, because we get these questions all the time.
Well, I just had one more statement. I think that years ago, when we went from BLS service to ALS service, there was a lot of conversation about it, because only 30% of the people at the time only needed ALS service. But I think the residents of Branch 40, once they actually experience the ALS service, will begin to grow in popularity, if that's a way to characterize it. So
yeah, no, for sure. What I've heard from the community is the majority of the community is very supportive of it. And it's when something happens, like we have a bad incident there, we'll get feedback like, oh, I wish we fought harder to keep our department, and with those types of statements. And a lot of times they're not informed of the long history of what had gone on leading into that, and the cost of providing fire service. I mean, it's not inexpensive, as we all know, to provide fire service to a community, and it's getting more expensive every day that goes by. That's why I think you're seeing this drive towards sharing services. Right now, we're sharing our fire marshal with Central Fire District because theirs retired for the next 6 months. We're participating in a reorganization study to get rid of some of the duplications that we're providing in those communities. And if we can maintain, like I said before, those local neighborhood community where there's a fire station in every community, their identity with an overall larger group that actually manages the organizations and provides a higher level of service, I think there's a good story to be told there and an answer to it.
thank you.
I have one last question. Can you tell me what the change in average response time is before and after the merger?
Yeah, so great question. So I believe, and Joel will have to correct me if I'm wrong, there was analysis done that was completed before the reorganization and part of the marketing. And I believe it was 88% of the parcels could be reached in 8 minutes or less drive time. I believe is what the number was. So depending on where you're at, in fact, we were just talking about that. I was just chatting with Marilyn about that before we got here. There's parts of that community that take us a significant amount of time, 12, 15 minutes to get to. They're obviously mountain roads. They're very narrow. We have all-wheel steer on our Type 1 engines, so we can get access into them pretty quickly. I've run a couple of calls while I've been down doing my office hours on Monday mornings. We had a person fall off the roof in the Conservancy area, which is that's one of those 15-minute area response times, and I got there in a handful of minutes. So yeah, there are significant response times, and just north of the fire station, when you look at it on a map, that is probably one of our break-even points when you respond, because we can go up 17 and come around from the top, or we can go down Granite Creek and come up from the bottom.
So has the response time changed since the Branson 40 fire station was?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. So it depends on how you measure response times, right? So our level of service as the Scotts Valley Fire District, we want to get to our urban core within 8 minutes, and we want to get to the rural area within 12 or 15. So when we look at that, 90% of the time, we're still meeting those response time goals. But the community before, and Joe alluded to this before, and I was going to dive into this a little bit deeper when I was doing my presentation. Having a single firefighter is not a fire department response. That is a false sense of security for a community. Number one. And number two, it puts that firefighter in a really bad position, because firefighters are trained to work in teams, and firefighters are trained to take extreme risks to save the lives and property of other people. And putting that firefighter there by themselves to respond to these critical incidents, whenever they may happen, they're going to try to do everything before they get there. And there's been stories that I've heard from the battalion chiefs that would respond to incidents there, where that solo firefighter was just out of breath and ready to collapse because they were trying to do so much before the rest of the company got there. So having a 3-person response model, even though it takes us a little bit longer to get there, is a much better response, in my opinion. And it's much more with the standard that's out there with other agencies that you'll see in this area.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello, Chief.
Hi.
I met you, I think, your first week here.
I think so.
In Santa
I met a
Cruz
lot of
County.
people my first week.
Yeah. Very, very impressed every time I've heard you speak.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you for the presentation. Regarding the Branson 40 staff that was integrated into your company, is there any plan to have them certify as paramedics, or is that offered as professional development?
No, great question. So we've been having that conversation internally. So a couple of things. When we were bringing the staff over, we met with our local union and negotiated the terms of them coming in. That's how the 2 firefighters that had less time became firefighters. And then Nate came over as an engineer, so he's driving the apparatus. Our long-term goals, they are now part of our organization. Nate qualifies to be an acting captain. He can test for captain this next time around. As far as paramedic training, we will likely offer that to them if they have an interest in doing it. Another thing we're looking at, because right now so many agencies are hiring a lot of people, it's hard to, you'll hear this from other fire chiefs, it's hard to get trained and qualified people to take these jobs. So we may end up looking at casting that net wider, hiring basic life support staff members, send them off to paramedic training, and then bringing them back as paramedics. So long answer to your question, but yes, our goal is to certainly offer that to them if they have an appetite and an interest in doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next presentation is from Moonshot Missions about the Big Basin Water Company, a topic we've been following closely. Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Chair. This will be a shorter presentation, but an important presentation. So this is something that LAFCO has been working on for the past year or so. We're talking about Big Basin Water Company, which is a private water company in the county. So LAFCO has no jurisdiction over that organization. That doesn't mean we can't help them, because they're in desperate need for assistance. As the commission knows, that there's a court receiver that's overseeing the operations of Big Basin Water. This commission drafted and adopted a governance report for this organization last year. And that was really used as a stepping stone to have discussions and having a central point to determine what are the options for the community to address these issues when it comes to receiving adequate water supply. That report kind of allowed this nonprofit organization, Moonshot Missions, to really come in and do a deep dive analysis And so that's the purpose of today's presentation. And we're lucky to have two representatives, Ms. Rochette and Mr. Andy from Moonshot Missions, that are going to summarize their analysis of that report that was published right before the holiday break. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rochette to give us an update of the report.
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Let me see if I can share my screen.
There we go.
You can see my screen?
Can you move that to the side? 1 second, Ms. Rochette.
No worries.
They got the donuts.
Okay, they leave them.
Nice.
For now, Ms. Rochette, we can see your screen. It's a little bit small, but I think the commission can see the presentation. So you can,
Okay. Let me see if I go to the next slide, if it, yeah, still same. Okay. All right, we'll get started then. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rochette Mariam. I'm a utility technical advisor with Moonshot Missions. I also have our managing director, Andy Kester, with me today. Thanks for having us. As Joe mentioned, I'll be providing a brief overview of our work with the Big Basin Water Company. So I'll begin with a short introduction of who we are and what we do, and then we'll dive into our work with Big Basin and discuss the progress we've made so far. So as Joe has mentioned, we are nonprofit consultants, and we provide technical assistance to water and wastewater utilities all over the U.S. We're not here to sell anything, and we don't benefit financially from any of the decisions utilities make. Our services are usually at no cost to the utilities, as is the case here. And this is thanks to funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the idea basically is to help utilities across the country access funding for improvements to their systems and also operate more sustainably. So before going into the results of the assessment, I want to give a bit of context for people who are not familiar with Big Basin or with all the details. So Big Basin Water Company is located in Boulder Creek, California. The water system was severely damaged by the lightning complex fire in 2020. And that destroyed critical infrastructure, including their surface water treatment plant. And this led to multiple ongoing compliance violations. And ultimately, the utility was placed under receivership in 2023 due to failure to comply with state directives. So that's why a comprehensive evaluation of the system's sustainability and long-term options became crucial. And that's how we got involved. So LAFCO, after completing that governance options report, reached out to us about Big Basin around March 2024, and we've completed several key pieces of work since then. So first, we conducted a comprehensive assessment looking at every aspect of the utility, so technical, managerial, financial. And you can think of it as a 360 evaluation of where things stand right now. And based on what we found, we developed a roadmap of priority projects for Big Basin, and we broke them down into short, medium, and long-term needs. We also took a deep look at different options for Big Basin's future. So this included analyzing different governance structures, evaluating their long-term sustainability, and then identifying potential funding options for each option. Along the way, we provided some guidance to Big Basin on how they can preserve their water rights. And currently, we're working with RCAC to determine if Big Basin qualifies as a disadvantaged community, which can open up additional funding opportunities for them. And speaking of funding, that is our next step. We're looking forward to helping Big Basin access the resources they need to implement some of these some of these improvements. So onto the assessment. So starting with our technical assessment, I'll just go over some of our observations just to give you an idea of where the system stands. So we'll go over source, treatment, storage, pump station, and distribution system. So starting with the water source, Big Basin lost its surface water treatment plant in 2020 due to fire. So the system does not use surface water anymore. It primarily relies on a single well 4 for production, and that is supplemented from purchased water from San Lorenzo Valley Water District. There are other wells in the system, but they're either inactive or low capacity. So well 4 is the main well. The issue with well 4 is that it has fluctuating capacity and is also not enough to meet demand at times. So this leaves Big Basin dependent on San Lorenzo Valley for backup supply. But there is no formal agreement for this arrangement. And also the purchased water is significantly more expensive than Big Basin's water. The good news is there is no water quality concern. There are no contamination issues in the area. In terms of storage and pump stations, Big Basin operates 7 storage tanks and 7 pump stations. They have adequate storage capacity. However, we did find several challenges or vulnerabilities. Some of their tanks and pumps don't meet regulatory standards. Some tanks are plastic and vulnerable to fire damage. 2 pump stations rely on temporary plastic pipes to serve customers, and some facilities lack backup power. So those are some concerns. And moving on to the distribution system, Big Basin is working on completing a comprehensive pipe inventory of their system. However, there's still gaps in maintenance programs. So they don't have any programs for like leak detection, valve inspections, cross connection control, and so on. Another critical concern is fire safety, as you all know. So the Boulder Creek area remains highly susceptible to future fires. Big Basin service area falls within a very high fire hazard severity zone still. And during our site visit, we identified critical fire safety concerns, including difficulty accessing some of their key infrastructure like well 4, some of their tanks, lack of backup power at some sites, some components being housed in very flammable wooden structures, and the use of materials vulnerable to heat damage. So we recommended some immediate improvements, and we also recommended the development of a comprehensive fire action plan. And we met with the fire chief to make sure that aligns with local emergency response capabilities. It is important to note, though, that since taking over in 2023, the receiver has made significant progress in stabilizing the system and the system's operations. And the primary focus has been on maintaining just basic functionality of the system and keeping the essential components running and operational. Gradually, they've been replacing damaged infrastructure as resources allow, but that's been their main focus, is keeping the system operational. So now moving on to the managerial side of the operation. So this is I don't know if you can see it since it might be small for you guys, but it's an organizational chart. So the system is currently managed by the receivership, with the receiver overseeing the management on behalf of the court, and then Cypress Water Services, which is the company operated the system, handles the day-to-day operations. So the owners still hold ownership, but they're not actively involved at this moment. This contrasts with how the system was managed prior to the receivership, where the owners led the operations, and then the Moors, as part owners, managed daily tasks. So we kept in mind that the receivership is temporary, and then a sustainable long-term solution is going to be needed. Oh, okay, so In our assessment, we identified several managerial challenges. So staffing is limited with the team covering, they can cover day-to-day needs, but they lack capacity for engineering support or long-term financial planning. Communication could also be improved. The small staff struggles to effectively reach some customers. Many of the utilities records were destroyed in the fire. So gathering what exists and filling in the gaps is challenging, but it's still in progress. Policies and plans are another area for improvement. Additionally, easements for water utility infrastructure are mostly based on handshake agreements and need formalization. And lastly, at the time of our report, Big Basin lacked insurance coverage. So these are some of our observations on the managerial side. So moving on to the financial review, we focused on several key areas. So budget is one, specifically historic revenues and expenses, cash on hand and reserve, which would normally cover unexpected costs or emergencies, rates and affordability. We looked at capital improvement plan, which helps prepare for infrastructure replacement, debt, so assessing their current obligations and then their borrowing capacity, and financial controls to ensure proper oversight of everything. So this first graph is Big Basin's historic revenues and expenditures going back to 2009. And you can see that in some years, revenues fell short of expenses, especially in 2021 and 2022. So that kind of signals they're in significant financial trouble. In these other graphs, and these graphs mostly came from the LAFCO report, you can see the operating ratio, which compares revenues to expenses, shows that Big Basin has been operating below break even for the past few years, largely to the high cost of purchasing water from San Lorenzo Valley. So there's another way to look at it. For the operating ratio, anything below the line or less than 1 is not breaking even. As a side note, 2020 is mostly high. So that bump that you see at 2020, that's because of the insurance payment following the fire. In terms of liquidity, Big Basin only had 1 day cash on hand at the end of 2022. And that is far below the recommended 6 months of cash on hand that you're supposed to have. So to summarize our financial observations, the receiver took it over in 2023 with the utility still in dire financial position. So the rates are not keeping up with day-to-day operations or longer-term maintenance and replacement expenses. So another rate increase may be needed. There's no formal plan for needed capital improvements or to place assets. And the overall financial picture with the revenues lower than the expenses, it really affects the ability for of Big Basin to finance some of these improvements that they need. All right, so let's get into the possible path forward, which is the second part of our analysis. So we considered several alternatives, which stem from the LAFCO report, as Mr. Serrano mentioned earlier. These alternatives are divided into 3 categories. So first one is annexation with San Lorenzo Valley Water District. Second one are hybrid options, which include a county service area, consolidation with another district, or acquisition by a private company. And standalone options, so creating a new special district, mutual water company, or a private company. So each option was evaluated based on criteria such as level of service, cost and affordability, and ownership and governance. So in terms of level of service, we assessed factors like technical capacity, operational experience, emergency response ability, and customer satisfaction. For cost and affordability, we looked at access to capital funding, potential rate increase, operational efficiencies, and then affordability programs as well. And lastly, ownership and governance evaluated factors like accountability, transparency, and the management experience of the governing boards. So those are the criteria that we looked at. And based on this extensive analysis, we ranked the alternatives, keeping in mind that none of these options are perfect or are simple to implement, and each has its own set of trade-offs. But this is how we ranked them, with the top 2 being annexation into San Lorenzo Valley Water District, and then also forming a county service area. So our hope is that with our recommendation, the receiver can make an informed recommendation to the court about the future of Big Basin. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for having us again. So if you have any questions, you can proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
I open the floor to public comments.
Thank you. Good morning and Happy New Year to your commissioners. My name is Becky Steinbruner. Thank you for this presentation this morning. I have been curious to know what the status was of the work. And I would like to know how receptive is San Lorenzo Valley Water to annexing Big Basin Water Company. I would also like to know what is the number of rebuilds that have been able to be accomplished within the boundaries of Big Basin Water. Many homes were burned in the 2020 fire. And is this in any way the lack of water or the problems with the water and sewage at all a stumbling block for the rebuilds in this area? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Serrano or anyone from Moonshot Missions want to answer about the willingness of San Lorenzo Valley to participate?
Yes, I see Ms. Rochette is nodding her head, so I'll defer to her or Mr. Andy.
Yes, thank you. Based on our work with San Lorenzo Valley, we've met with them a few times just to discuss the project and so on. So they are willing to, at this moment, they are willing to move forward with the project as long as funding is available. So that's what we're trying to figure out.
Thank you.
Chair, there is one request from online to
Please.
address the commission. So we're going to ask Ms. Julie Jennings to provide her comments.
Hello there. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you for the report, and I appreciate all the hard work that all the locals are doing to help us. I wanted to know a little more about the results that we're getting from the study that was, from the survey that was done, and what that means as to funding opportunities. And is this funding opportunities for the receiver for Big Basin Water, or would this be funding opportunities for someone that might, like if we were to be annexed by San Lorenzo Valley Water? What is that, what do we have so far, and what do we hope to get from that?
Well, thank you for the comments. Ms. Rochette, do you have any updates on that survey? Because I'm aware that the court receiver did send out a survey to the community. I just don't know the specifics, so I'll defer to you, Ms. Rochette.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so the receiver, we assisted the receiver along with RCAC in doing an income survey. So that's what that survey is. It has been completed and right now is under final review. I had asked for an update today, so they're reviewing it. Hopefully we'll have the completed survey sometime this week or next week. Aside from that, I think the second question was how would that impact funding opportunities? So if a Big Basin is designated as a disadvantaged community, which the state defines as their MHI being lower than the state's median household income, then that would open a lot of funding opportunities for a Big Basin. They would be eligible for a lot more funding than they would if they're not disadvantaged. So that's what we're trying to determine with that income survey. And I think the third question was whether the funding was for the receiver to make improvements to Big Basin, or can it also be used for consolidation? Is that correct, Julie?
Yeah, it sounded like, would it be used for the possible annexation to San Lorenzo Valley Water? What's going to be the use of that funding?
So it'll be for both. For immediate improvements to Big Basin, but also annexation to San Lorenzo Valley also.
Thank you, Ms. Rochette. And I'll just note, Chair, that this report is helpful for us to continue discussions with the court receiver and the community and San Lorenzo Valley Water. The next steps is a lot of progress has been made, as Ms. Rochette mentioned, about the court receiver. One of the key things was they didn't have any records of who was connected to the system. To me, that's like mind blowing, right? But the court receiver has actually found now has an inventory of who's connected to the system. They made internal improvements. As you recall, the county did take over the sewer component of Big Basin Water last year. That was a big deal. So now it's under the oversight of CSA 7, and there's still the big component is the water. So who's gonna be the successor agency? LAFCO has been coordinating with the court receiver, and we're hoping to have further discussions with San Lorenzo Valley Water, because that area, Big Basin Water, is within San Lorenzo Valley Water District's sphere boundary, which means that LAFCO has determined that this water district is the most logical service provider. Now, the key thing is the cost. The infrastructure is not up to par to the water district. So how do we address that financial gap? And that's something that we're continuing to work on, but we're very fortunate to have experts like Moonshot Missions who are providing services at no cost, to my understanding, which is kind of rare. But again, this is an ongoing process. And again, the fact that LAFCO is at the table and we're providing assistance, it's just another way of LAFCO doing everything we can to help these communities in need. But Chair, this is an informational item, so no action is required, but I do want to extend my appreciation to Ms. Rochette and Mr. Andy for their ongoing assistance on this issue.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Rochelle, please.
You want to go first?
Mine is very quick.
Yeah.
Just asked, can I get the link for the report?
Yes, so we will have, actually the link is already accessible on the LAFCO website. And if I can get approval from Ms. Rochette, we'll also include this PowerPoint presentation on our website. That way you can fully see the graphs and all the documents. So that's something that we'll do later today.
Commissioner Lather.
Okay, I have a list of questions. I'll start with maybe the easy one. Ms. Frechette, you indicated that you're helping them establish what their water rights are. Is that for the surface water?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I don't remember. Is it big? Is it which water body is that? Is that a trick question?
No, it's not. No, they have a few, and we've included it as a memo at the end of our report. So just the several creeks. So they have Jameson Creek and so on. So it's in the report.
Okay, I can look at that. And that's going to help them if as another source of water in the future when they potentially could rebuild it.
If they decide to do that, correct. But even if they don't decide to do that, those water rights are quite valuable. So that's something that can be used as an asset. It can be sold, it can be transferred.
And it can make them more desirable for someone to take over this.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then you are looking at the assets and identifying where they are. Is there some like, not condition, but recommendation for them to have an asset management program so that they can continue to do that? So that would be a recommendation for something to be funded?
Of course, yeah. The receiver has started doing that, so now they kind of have a complete inventory, and also because of our assessment as well, there is a complete inventory of the existing infrastructure right now, and from there, like you said, our recommendation is to build an asset management plan.
Yeah, and that would be mine, but it's not my
Correct.
job.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I know, I believe that the rates are established through the PUC, not Prop 218. I have a long history with this company when in a previous job, and I understand that he had difficulty somehow getting his rates increased, which I never really understood. Is there possibly a movement for you to help them establish what the rates should be and go to the PUC, or?
That is part of our recommendation, that they need to increase their rates. So we did compare them with like neighboring water utilities and so on, but also looking at their, operational costs and such. They're not really breaking even, so they do need to do a rate increase. So that is part of our recommendation. Who will do it is still not determined, but it will help as much as we can.
But yeah, and the steps you take and figuring out what the assets are, what needs to be done, will
Correct.
lead to establishing what needs to be coming in order to break even.
Correct. Yeah. So that's included in our recommendations. So we had about 46 recommendations, and that's included in there. And we broke them into, short term, medium, long term. Because right now the priority is keeping the system functional.
Right.
So people have water, right? And then the next step would be working on all of these.
Well, there has to be a future. Yeah.
Correct.
And of course, I've also done income surveys and with the RAC or CAC, and I kind of know the ins and outs of them. And one of the things that really needs to be provided, if the income is low enough to qualify, you don't just get money. You still have to have rates that are at a point that that show that that you can continue the system. They don't just throw money in there and you don't have to pay anything. So I'm hoping that that's part of what you're looking at when you're doing the what the funds should be and what the rates should be. I know that I had to do that and it wasn't pretty. We had to raise the rates quite a bit in order to even qualify for free money. So I just want to make sure that that's all part of the plan. Because even if San Lorenzo takes over, then they may be able to get funding for that based on that.
Correct. Yeah, exactly right. And by default, the funding programs, whichever they will go after, does look at that. You have to have creditworthiness and also be able to maintain the system long term. Like you said, they're not going to fund it if it's going to crumble in a year or so, right?
Because you have to have the financial capacity and then you have to have the engineering and managerial. And I can see that's where you guys are going. I just wanted to verify that.
Yep, exactly. Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you for all your work. That's the last of my questions. I don't know.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Well, I was just going to say I've had the opportunity to talk to a couple of the San Lorenzo Valley Water board members, and they're contemplating taking over Brack and Bray and Forest Springs, which are two smaller water districts on Big Basin prior to getting to the Big Basin Water. And I directed them to talk to you if they needed help.
Right. And what Commissioner Anderson is referring to, there's two private water systems that are already in San Lorenzo Valley Water District's jurisdictional boundary. So they don't need to go through the LAFCO process, but there's still a lot of steps in order for the water district to assume that responsibility of taking over those two water systems. But yes, they're already working with other private water systems now. And so that may help with this process with Big Basin Water, because they kind of already know what the steps are, but Big Basin is just a larger beast to deal with. But I do give kudos to the water districts for at least exploring and entertaining the idea of taking over these struggling water systems that are privately owned and operated.
Anything else from the commission? Commissioner Koenig?
Sure. Just interesting, the San Lorenzo Valley Water District said they'd be interested or receptive to taking over Big Basin as long as funding is available, right? So,
right.
Well, how big is that hole? Is my question. how much capital investment is needed to get the Big Basin to the point where, it could be integrated into San Lorenzo Valley water, and then what does that actually equate to as a per parcel that's currently within Big Basin or being serviced by them?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, was that the question?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we know the answers to those?
Mr. Shett, do you have a figure to share?
Yes and no. So I'll let San Lorenzo Valley share that when they're ready, but we've been kind of working with them to see what the funding gap is. And they've done quite a bit of work actually on trying to connect Forest Springs and Brackenbury first, right? Because that's how it worked out. So engineering designs, environmental reviews, and so on. So they're figuring out different aspects of the consolidation. So we've been involved with them as well, trying to see what that funding gap is. But it's obviously, since it's a water line, it's quite expensive. It's at least, it's a lot of $1 million, at least 20 and up, 15 and up. Because there's also other improvements that need to be made to consolidate, fire safety, fire hydrants, stuff like that. So
It's the multi-million-dollar question. We don't know the figure yet, but that's something that we're working collectively to identify what is the actual cost to improve those infrastructures to make it feasible for the water district to consider.
And remind me the number of parcels that are currently serviced by Big Basin.
it's 1,120.
Oh, wow. Okay. Final question is it possible this is a multi-step process where it needs to become a CSA in order to pass some kind of capital funding measure to bring the system up to a level of improvement that then SLV Water would integrate it, or would maybe a special, a Big Basin service area be created that then could have, a particular parcel tax associated with it, sort of similar to the Branson 40 discussion we were just having? What would those steps look like?
And I'll kind of chime in on that question. So good question. And we do need that type of analysis done. I don't think we need an official application to form a CSA or to annex. That question needs to be answered regardless of what change of organization we're considering. I think at this point, it would behoove this group to conduct that analysis now. That way we'll know the figure, and then we can determine what's the best option for the community, whether it's annexation or a CSA or the selling to or the purchase from another private water company. I think that number is that missing piece in order for us to determine what the next step is, at least LAFCO's point of view. So that's something that I believe the court receiver is exploring. That may be something that LAFCO may want to see if we should do a special study and take the lead on that. But I'll defer to Ms. Rochette for any additional information.
No, that's perfect, Joe. That's correct. I just wanted to clarify earlier. I said 1,100, so that's 1,100 people. In terms of connections or parcels, it's around 500. Sorry about that.
Anything else from the commission? Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, I'm just curious if we have an inventory of how many other struggling water districts there are in the county.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's the state controller's office, but there's a state organization that is monitoring all the private water systems, especially the struggling water systems in California. There's a website. I think the last LAFCO staff report that we provided an update on Big Basin, I think it was back in October, November. We included a link to that website. So yes, there is an inventory of struggling private water systems in California. I don't know the exact number, but it's in the hundreds. This is a statewide issue, if not a nationwide issue, when it comes to these private water systems that are struggling to have adequate water supply or compliance with water quality, or the fact that they don't know what they don't know, meaning of being in compliance. So that it's an issue. It's not Big Basin is not an isolated situation. It's happening statewide. Not to say that all private water systems are struggling, but there are a significant amount in California.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the commission? Okay, thank you very much. That ends our special presentation, so we'll move on to public hearing items. The first one being to appoint a new chair and vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. These next agenda items are going to be our lightning round, so I think we can expedite the discussion. But yes, at the beginning of each year, the commission appoints a new chair and vice chair to lead us in the calendar year. There is no specific rotation schedule per se in our policies. In your staff report, you do see who's been the chair and vice chair in the last couple of years, but staff is recommending that the commission have a discussion and appoint a new chair and vice chair for the remainder of the 2025 calendar year.
So open the floor. Open the floor to public comments on this item. Seeing none, any online? Okay, any suggestions from the commissioners?
I'll nominate our vice chairman for the chairmanship. He's
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on that nomination? All in favor?
I
Opposed? Abstentions?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the confidence and happy to serve this commission.
That's great. Okay, the next step is to appoint a vice chair. Any nominations or suggestions?
I'll nominate Commissioner Lather for vice chair.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is CSA 38, sphere review. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you, Chair. Last January 2024, this commission adopted a service review for CSA 38, which provides sheriff patrols in the unincorporated area of the county. As part of our analysis, we came to the conclusion that it was running, the CSA was running well. However, there was a lack of transparency. So we asked the county to either develop a standalone website or a dedicated web page in the county website to provide information of CSA 38, meaning its finances, its governance, maps of it, so that people know that it exists. So we gave them a deadline of a year. And so I'm happy to report that when the commission adopted the service review back in January, the county already started working on this recommendation, and they unveiled the CSA webpage before the holiday break in late 2024. So this is just a screenshot of the webpage that's on the county website, and it fulfills LAFCO's recommendations of being more transparent and providing information to the public. So the public now knows that there is a sheriff department, and in addition, there's the CSA 38 that collects funding to provide enough revenue to provide that type of services. So, Chair, this is a informational item, so no action is required. But I do want to extend my appreciation to the county for fulfilling this request.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Any comments from the public? Comments or questions from commission? All right. Thank you. Our next item is the UC Berkeley Water Report, potential legislation action.
Yeah, thank you. So last year, thank you, Chair. Last year, the UC Berkeley led the development of this report, and it looked at LAFCO's role in water consolidations. And the report kind of talked about what LAFCOs are doing around the state to address the water issues. They actually acknowledge Santa Cruz LAFCO's countywide water report that we adopted back in 2022 as a model for what other service reviews should look like, because that report not only analyzed all the water districts in our county, we also analyzed all the private water systems. Again, we have no purview over them, but that doesn't mean we can't analyze their system. So we did that. But the key takeaway of that report was maybe LAFCO needs a little bit more tools to address these issues around the state. And so there is an effort from these environmental justice organizations, two of them in particular, that are contemplating legislative action or a legislative bill that would give LAFCOs more tools to help address some water issues. So what is this legislative bill going to cover? Three things. One is giving the power to LAFCO to initiate annexation. So at this point, LAFCO has the power to initiate consolidations, dissolutions, reorganizations, mergers, et cetera, but we don't have the power to initiate annexations. And one of the issues when it comes to these private water systems that are struggling is that they don't have the bandwidth, or they don't have the staffing, or they don't have the funding. So they can't have the tools to initiate the process, or they don't even know what LAFCO is to consider annexations. This would allow LAFCO, as part of a service review, if we determine that maybe annexation would help this struggling community or system, we have the power to initiate annexation. So that's what one of the items that the bill is proposing to include. The second is to add more emphasis on our service reviews. So state law requires LAFCOs to adopt service reviews for all the cities and special districts at least every 5 years. But what happens after that? Some sit on a shelf for 5 years and nothing happens. This commission has been more proactive in adding some actions into our service reviews. But this bill would require the affected agencies to actually acknowledge the reports and have a discussion at an open session at their board meetings and look at what the LAFCO recommended, look what the findings are, and have a discussion at their board meetings. So that's the second component of this proposed bill. And the third one, which I feel it may be a little bit more contentious, but it's something that they're exploring, is including private water systems and mobile home parks under the jurisdiction of LAFCO. Now that would require change to not only the LAFCO law, but also the PUC law. So that, I think that one's going to be a little bit difficult to move forward with, but those are the three things that this group is looking into. And so staff is recommending that you give us meaning staff, direction to coordinate with that group so we can provide assistance and input as they move along with exploring this legislative bill. So that is what's happening right now. Staff is recommending that you give us direction to continue working with them, so that way we can provide LAFCO input as they explore this legislative bill. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, commissioners? Commissioner Lather?
Yeah, you saw me turn on my light. Huh? There should be a little sign up there. I know, I feel very strongly that mobile home parks need some help. And it is really good for me to hear that somebody's thinking about them, because the Office of the State Architect is in charge and they're not really following through on things the way I think they should be, especially for water and sewer, as well as flooding and a lot of other things. So I would encourage that you encourage them to keep that in there. I don't know what other commissioners think, but that's my thought about that.
Thank you. Commissioner Koenig.
Yeah, maybe just some clarification. I mean, I certainly agree that mobile home parks need help, and we've got the lion's share of them in the first district, so I'm well familiar with some of the issues. And of course, HCD permits mobile home parks. How would LAFCO be involved? And I mean, we're just looking at, utilities, or
my understanding is that the group wants to focus on mobile home parks that provide water and or sewer services. So maybe they're a component of a private water system. I guess they're casting a large net to say these systems are falling through the cracks, and we need an agency like LAFCO to have oversight, monitor them, analyze them, be part of, almost like if they're a special district. That way we have the authority to change their boundaries, analyze them through a service review. So that way there's more of a local body identifying that they exist and what is their status. I think that's what's missing. I think that's what the group wants LAFCO to provide for these mobile home parks that are providing a municipal service. That's my understanding. But that's why I want to be part of that discussion to make sure that I understand what they're trying to accomplish, because mobile home parks, I don't see them as private districts. So I'm trying to understand their logic, but I think there's an opportunity for LAFCO to play a role.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense because all the home parks here are part of a sanitation district or a water district. So thanks for clarifying that.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, we have a recommended action. I'll entertain a motion. That recommended action is to direct staff to engage in this discussion.
So moved.
I'll
By
second.
Commissioner Koenig, seconded by Commissioner Lather. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we have a presentation on the comprehensive quarterly report. Mr. Serrano.
And I'll defer to our Annas, who will give a 30-second presentation.
Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Officer, Chair. The comprehensive quarterly report is meant to be a snapshot of the work that your staff has been doing between the months of October and December 2024. There are 4 points that I'm just going to highlight for you today. And if you want more information, you can check back on the agenda packet where we have more information. But the first thing to report is that as of December 31st, 2024, we have 2 active applications that we're working on. Number 2, this year in 2025, the commission will consider 5 municipal service reviews and sphere reviews. And the next one is next month in March, and it'll be County Service Area 9, which we will be dealing with. Number 3, we wanted to inform the commission that regarding the budget, staff has only expended 35% of the proposed budget. So we're doing really good in terms of our budget. And finally, between the months of December and October, staff had over 30 meetings with partner agencies and members of the community. Some things to highlight are our ongoing meetings regarding the reorganization of CSA 48. We met with Watsonville's new city manager, the UCSC chancellor. We continue to prepare and work for the educational workshops on road CSAs and water systems. And finally, we've been working a lot with LAFCO, including the annual conference and some other really important meetings, which the executive officer will elaborate on. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Estrada.
Chair, and I'll just give you a quick update on what's going on with LAFCO. So that is our statewide organization. We meaning LAFCO, there's 4 regions. Each region has a representative. Your executive officer is a representative for the coastal region. So a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. Long story short, the LAFCO board has moved on from our previous executive director. So we have an interim executive director operating the organization, Jose Henriquez from Sacramento LAFCO. That's a temporary solution. There are some member agencies that are concerned about LAFCO's direction. Unfortunately, some LAFCOs have indicated that they're not going to renew their membership for the upcoming fiscal year. So the regional officers have coordinated with the LAFCO board. We will be conducting a special meeting this Friday to address the membership concerns and hopefully get those LAFCOs back to the family. There's a lot more that's going on. The coastal region LAFCOs have decided to be patient, provide recommendations to the LAFCO board this Friday. Hopefully that goes well. And then that way, your staff and all the other coastal region LAFCOs will be presenting similar updates to their commission in March. So that's the plan. I will be providing a staff report kind of explaining what has happened and what are the next steps. I am optimistic that we are going to right the ship this Friday, but there's a lot going on in the LAFCO world, and I'm hoping that we can get past it. But that's just something that your staff has been working closely these last couple of weeks, especially during the holidays. We just published the agenda packet for that special meeting last night. So in addition to all the work that we're doing here, your staff is also helping address some issues with the LAFCO family. So that's a quick update. Chair, this is an informational item, so no action is required, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? Hearing none, anything from the commissioners?
We have one.
So I see that the LAFCO, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, was there a public comment?
No,
Oh,
sir, I was
okay.
Sorry.
referring to.
I heard commissioners and I jumped in. It's in October, the 22nd to the 24th, the conference.
Yes, so that's one of the questions of what's going to happen to the conferences if we lose these member agencies, because the ones that are leaving are one of the larger ones. But yes, if everything goes well, we will have the next annual conference. It's going to be in San Diego from October 20th to the 23rd, I believe, or 21st to the 23rd.
Are they one of the ones that want to leave?
Yes. So it's public information. So San Diego LAFCO has indicated that they're not going to renew their membership. San Bernardino LAFCO has indicated that they're not going to renew their membership. And there's two other LAFCOs from the Southern region have indicated they will most likely not renew their membership. So that's 4 out of the 6 Southern region LAFCOs, and they're the biggest ones. They contribute a lot to the LAFCO, so that it's very unfortunate, and we're hoping that after Friday we're able to get them back.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope for that too. Thank you.
Anything else from the commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, I just encourage you to do whatever you can to keep the family together. This has always been one of the strong parts of LAFCO. And it was the way we used to do with the legislative activities. In other words, we can say we represent all of the LAFCOs, and this is what we have concerns with your bill, or we like it, or whatever else.
Exactly.
And actually, in time to time, I think some of the really tiny LAFCOs, we've actually helped them stay in the family. And here, the most wealthy of them are thinking of leaving. It's not a good situation.
Right. And we're doing everything we can. I think we have a really good relationship with the member agencies. When I say we, I mean the executive officers. We really see ourselves as a family. And I think this is just family members bickering. But I think we're going to be able to move past it. But there are some really significant issues that need to be addressed. And I understand their frustration with LAFCO at this time, but that doesn't mean that it can't be resolved. And we're working on that.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is written correspondence. Mr. Serrano, is there anything you'd like to highlight?
Nothing to highlight for written correspondence, and it's information. Well, there's nothing to take act, so we can move on to the next item.
Okay, and how about press articles?
Nothing to report. These are just articles that we felt that were maybe useful for the commission to be aware of.
Okay, the next item is commissioner's business. Is there anyone on the commission that wants to share with the rest of the commission? Seeing none, we'll move to our closed session. And
yes, so thank you, Chair.
I think there's people in there.
Oh, actually, our closed session is going to be down the hall.
Oh, okay.
So we're gonna not in there. It's gonna be in the red room, Redwood room. So if you follow our legal counsel, you'll go to the closed session, and hopefully it's a quick discussion. It's just an overview of staff's performance in 2024.
I really have to go to the back.
Hold on. Okay, go ahead. So we'll defer to you, Chair, when you want to reconvene.
okay, I think we lost a couple. Fred and we were heading for the door, but I think
Yep. Do we need a full board to reconvene?
No, so I mean, I can go ahead and make the announcement if you'd like.
Okay, well, I'll
Chair,
I'll
that's
wait
okay.
to the chair. And do you want to wait for some commissioners to come back, or do you want to?
no, it's good to have Jim in the room. Thanks.
Yeah,
And,
Okay.
Yeah, go, please.
And just announcing there's no reportable action on a closed session. Thank you, Chair.
And then
You can declare.
we can adjourn. Is that correct?
Yep, we can. Thank you.
Adjourn. All right, thank you.
Feels like I've been here all day today.
I was just telling
Well, I had
Josh
to
and
have-
Francisco, this is like the longest meeting we've had.